Welcome back everyone to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy at Scruffy Tales. Let's get into it. And today I would like to talk about something that is rarely mentioned, as far as I have noticed on YouTube at least. You have to go look for the articles, the interviews, where various newspapers have talked to Ukrainian troops on how they were trained before being shipped to the front line. Um, Interviews with instructors talking about how long they have with the recruits and how long they have to prepare them for the realities of war. And I want to make it perfectly clear right now. I'm not shit talking the Ukrainian army. I am not degrading Ukrainian soldiers. I am not um, trying to take away anything from their achievements, their courage, their bravery, their experiences, or anything of the kind. I'm just gonna make a video about articles I've read dealing with how Ukraine prepares its troops before they're being shipped into battle. And truth be told, it's a grim, gritty, harsh reality that Ukraine has been forced to face and accept in order to get enough troops ready for the front lines. According to US sources, Ukraine has lost around 70,000 troops in this war so far, and it is believed that Russia has lost somewhere maybe up to 300,000 troops. And Ukraine's Western allies have trained around 63,000 Ukrainian troops up to this point. And to put it in perspective, Russia has mobilized around an additional 300,000 troops to bolster the war effort after having sent in 250,000 troops at the beginning of the invasion in 2022. And in the end, it's a matter of simple math. Russia has more people than Ukraine. Russia can get a hold of more recruits than Ukraine. Russia can keep sending in troops, fresh recruits, into the fight over and over for years and years and years, uh, with no end, basically. And Ukraine can't compete with that. They just can't. Yes, Ukraine has a large population, but only so many people are fit to fight. So Ukraine is in a tough spot because Russia can just send in more guys at them, and at the meantime, Ukraine is slowly running out of people that are fit and able to fight this war. The fact of the matter is that Ukraine needs troops on the front line in quick and short order. And the situation is probably desperate. They have lost a lot of men and they need to replace them quickly to hold the line against the Russian onslaught. And there is no time to properly train soldiers for 6 to 8 months. Ukraine needs boots on the ground now. The sad reality is that Ukraine not only needs quality troops, but also cannon fodder to hold the trenches. The Ukrainians that have been sent to the West, mainly to Britain, to train with NATO, they get between 35 days up to 3 months of training, depending on the task that they're supposed to do. Ordinary infantry, 35 days, vehicle crews and what have you, 3 months. As a rule, you need at least 6 months to fully train a Western soldier. So if you reduce that to 35 days or even 3 months, it means you're cutting corners and you have to focus on the absolute basics of soldiering. How to hit accurately, how to take care of yourself in the field, simple bounding tactics, fire and maneuver. One guy shoots, one guy moves. And also the very basics of urban warfare. How to stack up at a door, how to enter a room, and what have you. They learn the basics of setting up a field camp, how to stay dry and clean in the field, to always have dry socks ready and stuff like that. The very simple things that a soldier must know in order to be able to stay somewhat effective in a trench or a foxhole. And there's no time for more advanced tactics. There is nothing on how to clear trenches, nothing on how to deal with minefields or how to deal with booby traps. And also, the Ukrainians end up in a bit of a weird situation because the troops they've sent to the West has been a mixed bag. Some have been fresh recruits, others have seen war on the front line. So NATO needs to train new guys from the bottom up and at the same time try and deal with people who has seen war, who has killed people, who needs more advanced training. So it becomes very frustrating for NATO when they get this mixed bag of soldiers with various levels of experience. They don't know where to begin or how to where to place the bar, so to speak, in the training. But what these Ukrainians get is quality training nonetheless. Uh, their instructors, they know what they're doing, they know what they're teaching. It works. These Ukrainians will know how to handle themselves in the field, how to remain combat ready. They will know how to shoot accurately. They will know simple tactics, simple commands, simple orders, and stuff like that. They will be better off than they were before, without a doubt. Now, compare this to what you can read about the soldiers being trained in Ukraine. There's a YouTube video with a Swedish volunteer instructor in Ukraine, for instance, and he says he has only 3 days to teach recruits, to train recruits before they're shipped off to God knows where. And other sources, other Ukrainian soldiers say that other recruits get 3 weeks of training before they end up at the front line. And 3 days to 3 weeks of training to be a soldier, that's not enough time. And you basically only learn how to fire your weapon, maybe how to set up camp, and the theory of tactics. They can explain you do this in order to achieve this, but then you can't really train on doing those things. It won't become second nature. It won't become muscle memory. and you're told what you need to know as a soldier, but you don't really have a chance to learn it. And the consequence is that you have ill-prepared soldiers with little confidence in their abilities. They do not understand military thinking, and they will not be comfortable with their equipment. They will not understand their equipment. They will not trust their equipment. And having to do things under stress, under pressure in a trench line will become difficult, because it won't be second nature cleaning your rifle or getting a jam fixed when the rifle refuses to fire and stuff like that. It's just not. It's you get what you pay for, right? That's basically it. And if you only have 3 days of training or even 3 weeks, you will be tactically inept. You will be unable to perform the simplest of offensive tactics. You will not understand orders and terminology. If you're in the heat of battle and a sergeant or lieutenant shouts orders at you, you will not understand those orders. You will not know what it means if he gives you an order relying on military lingo, right? Because he will do that, because a sergeant or a lieutenant with experience will know what needs to be done, so he will tell you what to do in the most efficient way possible, and that is using military terminology. And if you do not understand that, you will just you will do the wrong thing at the moment, or you will just freeze up and not do anything because you don't understand what you need to do while bullets are flying overhead. And reading articles on how the Ukrainians are trained in the West, we learn that these soldiers only receive the absolute basic knowledge on how to function as a soldier. More advanced training on tactics and combined arms warfare is then handled once they're back in Ukraine by Ukrainian instructors. And here is where we have a clash between the West and Ukraine. The soldiers that have been trained in the West have been trained to function as Western soldiers, however brief the training was. And then they end up in Ukraine with officers who do not wage war like the West does. Ukraine does not wage this war relying on NATO tactics or NATO doctrine, but on a Ukrainian doctrine. And this doctrine mixes Western thinking with an old Soviet mindset. And what do I mean by this? Well, Ukraine started to how should I put it, upgrade its army in 2014 when it brought in Western instructors, Western analysts, and Western help to build up the army, modernize the army. So they started receiving training and exchanged ideas with Western armies and started to incorporate that into the Ukrainian army, an army that was very much structured along old Soviet ideas. And this has shaped and formed the Ukrainian army into a mixed bag of things. You have a mix of Western and old Soviet ideas and doctrines merged into a unique Ukrainian doctrine on how to conduct warfare. And one of the major clashes, I guess, is how you implement suppression in order to maneuver. And in the West, you fire to maneuver, and in the East, you maneuver to fire. So basically, Western armies open fire on an enemy position or a believed enemy position in order to suppress the enemy, and that should allow another unit freedom to move and outflank the enemy and put pressure on the enemy. Russia does it slightly the other way around. It's basically recon by force on a grander scale. You move up, find the enemy as you take fire, and then you call in artillery on that enemy location and obliterate that location. Enemy fire, your artillery stops and you move in. If the enemy fires again, well, you call in more artillery, and that's how you keep moving. You find the enemy with your troops and then you flatten that area. This gives the enemy the chance to open fire first, obviously, but the theory is that yes, you will lose a couple of soldiers, but then you will obliterate the entire enemy force. It's a simple way of waging war, but if you compare that to Western combined arms, in the West, everything needs to happen at the same time. You need to fire on the enemy while you're moving, and you need to be moving while you fire on the enemy. And preferably, you need to be able to move close to the enemy while your own fire is hitting the enemy to put as much pressure on the enemy as possible, forcing him to withdraw, make a bad decision tactically, or what have you, so that you can then exploit that. And if there is something to exploit, it is the commander closest to the action, be he a sergeant, a lieutenant, or whatever. He will make the decision, not some general, not some colonel. A sergeant or a lieutenant will make the decision to attack and exploit the advantage. This is called mission command. This does not exist in the old Soviet Russian doctrine. And that is definitely something the Ukrainians are struggling with. Having a colonel or major making all the decisions compared to trusting a sergeant or lieutenant to begin an assault. And in mission command, if a lieutenant decides, I have an opportunity, I'm going to go for it and take my platoon forward, then everything else has to follow suit. Then the captain of the company has to, okay, my lieutenant is moving, I need to support him. And then someone on battalion level needs to adapt to this as well. And they go, oh, one of our platoons are moving, the company is following, we need to give them fire support, call in mortars and artillery. That is not how Russia does it, and that is not, to an extent, what Ukraine does. Since they still have officers that are very much fixated on the older Russian thinking. So you can imagine if you have a competent sergeant and lieutenant being trained in the West by the British, by the Swedes, by the French, Dutch, Germans, and they teach him, if you have an opportunity, take it. Take your platoon, take your company, push into the gap in the enemy line and exploit the weakness. And then they return to Ukraine and they want to do this. They have an opening and they want to seize the moment. But their officers will not provide them with the support because they will not let those troops attack because they have not made the decision. They do not trust lower NCOs and officers to make such decisions. So here we have the problem between NATO and Ukraine and this weird mix of Western thinking and the old Soviet doctrine that we have in Ukraine, where you don't really know what an officer how an officer wants to fight. Will he issue orders from the top down, or will he trust NCOs and junior officers to actually make the call on how to engage and defeat the enemy? Now, I recently read an interview by the Business Insider. I would talk to a Ukrainian soldier, a Ukrainian Marine, who had been fighting at the Krynky bridgehead, the location where the Ukrainians have crossed the Dnieper River and actually pushed into the small town of Krynky and established a foothold in occupied territory. And what he told the journalist was that the recent batch of Ukrainian troops sent in to strengthen this area of the front line, to fortify the bridgehead and hold the bridgehead, were soldiers with only 3 weeks of training prior to showing up at the front line. And he even said that some of them, remember, these are Marines, amphibious troops, soldiers meant to fight in and around water. He even said that some of them didn't know how to swim. This is not ideal. And cut off by a river, and they will be short on supplies. This is a tough job, even for well-trained and experienced troops. This is a job for well-equipped, well-trained Marines or paratroopers, not militia with a couple of days of training. So this well and truly highlights Ukraine's problems at the moment. They need soldiers on the front line so badly that they're left with no other option than to send these barely trained men and women to hold this extremely exposed, extremely vulnerable, and extremely important section of the front line that they really should be sending in the best of the best that they have. Elite troops that you can rely on, that know how to take care of themselves, that won't panic, that know how to treat friendlies who are wounded and stuff like that. Men and women that can get the job done. But instead, Ukraine is forced to send in these barely trained troops, soldiers barely able to function as soldiers, basically, are now left to holding this very vital and very dangerous and exposed section of the front line. And the fact that Ukraine is desperate and unable to properly prepare a lot of its forces before sending them into combat should be a clear indication that helping Ukraine is the right thing to do. Ukraine needs all the help it can get. Western training in Britain for 35 days is a lot better than only 3 days of training in Ukraine. Ukraine needs armored vehicles, ammunition, artillery, and aircraft. And the West should do all in its power to supply these things to Ukraine to give their soldiers a fighting chance. What the Ukrainians lack in training and readiness, they make up for with courage and a will to defend their loved ones from Russian aggression and from Russian oppression. Despite everything, Ukraine is willing to fight to survive, and we in the West should make sure they can continue that fight, because they can't continue the fight without our help. The harsh, grim reality is that this is a war that is fought with cannon fodder. And sadly, what else can you call troops that have received only a week of training, maybe a month at most? They are tasked with crossing the Dnipro, to hold the trenches at Avdiivka, and to assault the bunkers at Robotyne and Verbove. They are tasked to charge across minefields, clearing out trenches and buildings with little to no training on how to do so effectively. The only way to gain experience is to survive. And the only way to survive is, to be honest, to be lucky. Experience is hard-earned, and those who live long enough to be able to teach new recruits the skills they need in order to survive are well and truly people who deserve our respect for their courage and sacrifice. Because these people will one day be teaching Western soldiers on how to fight a proper, real war. Ukraine is not the only army relying on cannon fodder. Far from it. Russia relies on the poor, on criminals, and on the foolish to fill their ranks. Without any training, these soldiers are ordered to storm into enemy positions, dying by the thousands just because Putin has this mad dream that he will annex Ukraine and for some reason eradicate the country and its people from history. Ukraine has no easy task ahead of them. With no time to prepare, they are asked to risk everything to hold a barbarian horde at bay. And if they fail, their children will be abducted, their women will be violated, and the men will be murdered. Oppression and torture will be part of everyday life in Ukraine, should Russia succeed and win this war. Of course, Ukraine is desperate. Of course, they have no choice but to fill the trenches with ill-prepared troops. Because there is no other option. It is their only hope. The battles must be fought and won today. Because if those trenches are empty, all of Ukraine will burn and the Ukrainian people will be removed from the pages of history. And give them hell. So yes, Ukraine is an army of ill-prepared, poorly trained cannon fodder. Not all units are like this. Many units are well-equipped, well-trained professionals. But if they send in troops with only 3 weeks of training to hold a vital location like Krynky, that should tell you something of what it might look at elsewhere on the front line. Ukraine is desperate. Ukraine needs our help and needs our support. They have the courage. All they need is the guns and the ammunition. And we should provide it. Until the next time, gå på marsch Ukraine and give them hell. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.